Yash,
Yash, we can't hear you.
Hi, am I
can you
audible now?
unmute yourself? Yeah, yeah.
Okay, sorry for that. But good evening, everyone. And on behalf of the Rohini Nilekani Philanthropies, welcome to the second day of Charcha 2021 and our first session for the day, Lage Raho. The last 18 months have been incredibly challenging for us all. Today, we're here to discuss lived experiences of stakeholders from varied backgrounds and the role they played during the COVID-19 pandemic. We want to draw out and discuss the importance of active citizenship in this crisis and unpack different views on what enabled this wave of co-creation from the citizenry. Before we begin, a few housekeeping rules for the audience. There are two windows or tabs to your right. The chat window for conversations on topics being discussed. We encourage you to let us know your thoughts throughout the session, and a Q&A window for asking us any questions. You can ask us questions throughout the session as well, and questions can be upvoted. We hope to run the session for around 50 minutes, and if time permits, for the last 10 minutes, we will take the most upvoted questions and direct them towards our speakers. With that, let me hand over to our moderator for the session, Smaranita Shetty, the co-founder and CEO of India Development Review, to introduce our speakers and take this session forward. Over to you, Smaranita.
Thanks, Yash. So like Yash said, we're going to speak, we're going to spend the next 45, 50 minutes talking about uh, how the three panelists that we have here today saw civic action and engagement play out over the last 18 months. And each one of them comes from a different vantage point, right? One is from a corporate foundation, one is from a philanthropic foundation, and one from like a community and a coalition of grassroots organizations, and each one of them will speak to their lived experiences during the pandemic, the role that each of them and their organizations played during this crisis, and also what I think we'll have suggestions on what we can do to maintain this momentum going forward. Given life is never going to be the same in the future. So to speak to this, we have Gayatri. We have two Gayatris. We have Gayatri Devecha, who heads sustainability and CSR at the Godrej Group. We have Gayatri Nair Lobo, who's the CEO at A.T. Chandra Foundation. And we have Ved Arya, who's the founder of Shrijan and the force behind RCRC, which is the Rapid Rural Community Response. It's a coalition of more than, I was going to say 60, but he told me this afternoon that it's now 80 organizations, grassroots organizations across 15 states. So welcome everyone. And before we actually start, I think Yash has a poll that we can put up there for our audience, just so that we get a sense of where we are today. Uh, I think for if you all can click on the polls tab on the right hand side, uh, there's a question which says, "What percentage of your time are you still spending on COVID relief?" So I think a lot of people in this audience would have spent significant amounts of time both during the first and the second wave. I think what we're keen to understand is now that that's receded, are people still spending any time on anything to do with COVID in whatever shape and form? So if you could answer that, then we get a sense, and maybe some of that will feed into how some of the panelists respond, and how they're thinking about it and the suggestions they have. Yash, how much time, Rini, will we give them to answer this? To give you a sense.
30 seconds more.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, Marinita, in the interest of time, I think we can start.
Great. So I think the panelists here can all see this, right? So less than 20%, 62% of the audience spending less than 20%. Another 25% is between 20 to 60%, which is still, actually, we don't know if the less than 20% is zero, but it's still interesting that there is a fair amount of time and energy still being spent on this. So just keeping this in mind, if we could start, and I'll ask all of you all to kind of just, we can set up the session by just having some opening remarks from each one of you. And maybe you could speak to what the impact of COVID was on your constituencies, right? So whether as a funder, it was your nonprofits, whether as a nonprofit, it was like the grassroots organizations, it was the communities. So what was the impact on your constituencies? And what did you have to do to support them, during this crisis? So Ved, if I can start with you, since you're first on my screen. So if you can keep it to around 3-4 minutes, because I know I have a lot of questions and I'm guessing the audience will have it as well. And then, yeah, we can take it from there. Wait.
Yeah, thank you. As I put my slides up there, I want to thank Smaranita. I want to thank the Nilekani Philanthropies for organizing this. This is a very interesting time because as we are seeing that things are getting maybe the crisis is receding, but I think also we need to see whether crisis is over or in some ways the crisis is still persisting and what we can do about it. And I'm going to actually talk about what the organizations that are at the grassroots are doing, how they look at it. And in fact, I'm looking forward to as a learning session because I think the crisis is much huger, if I can use the term, in front of us. So, and I want to congratulate once again that we are. Yeah, how to move it forward? I'm just. How to go next?
You should see an arrow at the bottom of your screen, just under the presentation.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how the second point, this unbridled, unprecedented rise in civic action. I think term is a little bit self-congratulatory in for others to see and say and make the judgment. And we will see also NGOs that are at the grassroots. We are 80 of them, how they could continue their work as well as take up this work that was on their head last March. So let me give you a little bit of a quick background, and I want to start with the much larger questions. The papers are filled with this data today as we complete 75 years of independence. 50% of Indians earn less than 50,000 rupees, which means per person, he or she is earning only 125 rupees to take care of everything, livelihoods, health, and education. 25%, which is the bottom quartile, is earning less than, the households are earning 8,500 rupees. Merely 70 rupees a day, if you want to count in terms of dollars, is less than $1. Even that the bottom line, the poverty line is moved to $1.9 of the World Bank. Look at it, what is the overall task? 32 million people slipped into poverty during last pandemic. This is Pew Research quoted by the New York Times. And this is not talking about the other fault lines in our democracy, in our society, which is gender, caste, even I would include religion, and even geographies as we see around us. And what to talk about the climate crisis recently now, the IPCC report has come and you see abundantly, there's not so abundant amount of water that is there in the ground. So in front of this, RCRC is just is nothing. It's a drop in the ocean. We might want to say that we started with 7 organizations, and we are 80 now, and we are in 15 states. But so what? The task is much bigger. I want to say that we looked at the challenges the civil society faces, and we don't have enough. Individual capacities are there, but that is not enough to advocate the cause of poverty, and we have very limited mechanisms to collaborate. It is often said that we say to communities in the villages, please come together in form of self-help groups, but we rarely talk to each other, and we stuck with our logos and with our egos. And there's so much trust deficit between the people in the market and people outside. We say these guys are always making profit, and they say these guys are scamsters. So how to deal with this is something that can we look at way forward rather than stuck in the past. As Aurobindo, Master Aurobindo is quoted by Pratap Banu Mehta today. Look at the noons of tomorrow, and so rather than the twilight of yesterday. So I think we created a network ecosystem. We actually developed knowledge through our research, and we pooled resources to actually have a collaboration with Ministry of Rural Development. We did all that, and then still we are very small. We represent a very small number of the overall NGO size, about which there is a huge amount of dispute, of course. But if you look at 8 lakh people, almost 1 million people are employed in the NGOs. We are representing only 2%. Even if we might brag and say 1300 crore rupees was the total gross budgets or grants we received among ourselves, what that is nothing. If you look at the Narega, it is the 60,000 crores. We have to encash that to reach the poor people and so on. I think still we have a lot to go and do something. So we did a little bit of an exercise as RCRC. What do we want to become? Members said that RCRC should be a representative body for the civil society sector. We should amplify people-centric expertise that we seem to have to contribute to policy making. What there is a hope for this or not, but we are going to try to make it happen. That's RCRC's vision and mission. Can we be the go-to organization? Can we be the network to go and people join? Little bit of hope. We started with 7 in March 2020. Soon it became 20, then we became 60, and as I just shared with Smarita, we are 80. There was a lot of not ghar wapsi, but welcome. 15 new members joined 2 weeks ago, and we got to do a lot to keep them going. I want to just share with my colleagues that we respect everybody, and you won't believe we do general body meetings almost every fortnight. So to get to know each other in the Zoom times, of course, Zoom is helping.
Ved, if I can stop you here now, and maybe we can talk about some of this going forward. If we can hear from Gayatri Devecha and Gayatri Lobo right now, because some of this, we kind of covered as the conversation proceeds as well.
Thank you. Yeah? Thank you very much. Yes.
Thanks, Ved.
Yes.
Gayatri Devecha, would you want to speak a bit about the impact, that you saw on communities, and what's the support that you had to provide as Godrej?
Yeah. So thanks, Vanita, for the question, and thank you to the team at Rohini Nilekani Philanthropies and the Nudge for organizing this. I think safe to say the last 18 months has been a real learning experience for all of us. And, we were definitely doing things we never imagined ourselves to be doing as funders or as CSR. And I'm certain that the case is the same for a lot of our not-for-profit partners who we work with and who are delivering on-ground relief. I think a few things really, sort of stuck out as, real deep learnings to take forward from this. One was the, incredible amounts of collaboration across our employees, across our value chains, across our, with our partners, between our partners, with government, with other funders. I think the level of communication that we were all in with one another was extremely productive, because, everybody was trying to respond, both in the first wave and the second wave to a crisis situation, and that enabled us to really sort of learn from one another very quickly. And I think what was really unique about this collaboration is how quickly it yielded results. Even for things that we were trying very hard to do for a long while. For example, we work on worker entitlements in construction. It's something we've been doing for a few years, but the speed at which we were able to unlock emergency cash relief from government, because everybody was fundamentally in this together and sort of learning from one another, and no one had all the answers. I think it's been for specifically for the not-for-profits we work with, and our whole portfolio, and ourselves as a CSR practice. I think what has been really what has been a big impact in the past 18 months is taking a long, hard look at our programs and saying that, COVID has obviously disrupted it. There are many needs that we didn't know, existed, even though those needs were there before COVID. It's just that it's been brought to light, whether that's in accessing government schemes, whether that's, in accessing finance to scale micro enterprises. And so between the first and the second wave, we had this really nice sort of, reflective period to be able to think, okay, what have we learned from this first wave that can be baked into programming moving forward? I think, this is my last point, really. I think one of the biggest takeaways as a funder has been I don't think we've ever appreciated just how much NGOs are on the front lines as we have through this pandemic, because basic things like how do we get food to our construction workers who are stuck on our sites, or how do we help migrant workers who work within our factories, how do we help communities around our factories, and obviously our wider community and places where we work also. I don't think any of that would have been possible without being able to lean on the expertise of our not-for-profit partners and be honest in our vulnerability of not having the answers. So I think now knowing that the critical role that NGOs play, and why that the case for why we need to continue to support them beyond programmatic funding, I think to my mind has become much stronger. I'll stop there. Svanita, you're on mute.
Sorry, we should have figured this out by now. But yeah, Gayatri, Lobo, you want to talk about it from your point of view? Yeah.
Yeah. So the way we looked at the pandemic, one, obviously everybody was terrified about stepping out, and just want to continue on the thought that Gayatri Devija shared, that our frontline workers, our NGOs were out there. We have to salute them. We have to salute the coalition that Ved has put together, and other frontline workers. But um, given the restrictions that we had, we tried to do the best possible. And I'll share a little bit about how we looked at the pandemic. And I think in the first wave, the entire team, and when I say entire team, we're a tiny team, but the entire team just pivoted and said, we need to figure out what needs to be done. This was pre-lockdown when we started hearing about cases, and we saw the devastation happening in Europe. So very early on, we said, okay, clearly there's this thing called PPE that we've never heard of before, but we need to figure out who can make them, how we can get them through hospitals, N95 masks. We used to only hear about it in the context of pollution in Delhi. And now suddenly we were talking about getting N95 masks made. So we did all of that early March. This is pre-lockdown. And I think that gave us a little insight that we can try and be ahead of the curve rather than reacting to the curve. So, with a bunch of other funders, other non-profits, the Godrej Group was a very key part of our collaboration efforts. We said, look, what do we need to do? One thing we said is, when lockdown was announced, the first thought was people are not going to get food, right? We were in our buildings with food deliveries coming to our houses, but we knew that, especially in a place like Mumbai, where they were creating hotspots and cordoning it off, we said, how are people going to get food there? So we created this this space that BMC gave us in Mumbai, and we said, okay, let us feed 70,000 people. And we put a very unrealistic at that time target of saying within a week's time they need to all get food in their houses. And it took us 8 days, but we got it there. We got it to them. And again, it was the BMC, it was funders who overnight came together and pooled in close to 4 crores. It was suppliers. We had suppliers from potatoes and onions and dal and whatnot else coming from across the country. We had our NGO partner Praja, who was in NSCI collecting all of this. We had 400 volunteers working there and packing food. So when you think about civic action, like I could not think of a better example. And then we realized that okay, dry food is one thing. People need to get fruits and vegetables as well. So then we started another campaign around that. But what we did was create templates saying that okay, now this is what we've done. This is what it cost us. Here's where you could actually save costs, which we didn't do because we were in a rush, and share it with anyone and everyone who cared to look at it. So that was one thing we did. The other thing we said is one big gap we are seeing is data. We don't know who's got COVID. We don't know who has antibodies. So we said, let's fund research that goes into this. So we had again, with the Godrej Group, we did the first Zero survey in Mumbai. So like that, we try to see what do we need in order to try and help before things get too bad and we can't do it. And I think that's a learning that we want to take back into everything that we do as a foundation. So, trying to be ahead of the curve, collaborating with others. We'd realized that when we've done enough study and we looked at data, there are more people interested in collaborating with us. And so, these are three things that we want to then take back into our regular foundation work. So in the second wave, one big learning we had in the first wave was because we switched, our actual NGO partners weren't getting the support that we wanted. They needed. So we said, we're not going to do that again. We have to make sure our programs continue. We didn't stop funding, but we didn't have time to spend with them, or we didn't have time to, talk through issues with them. And they were all struggling, right? It was a pandemic that was like indiscriminately hit everybody. So we said in the second wave, how do we ensure that we're able to balance things, but yet be able to do the work that needs to be done on the ground? So, we've done some different kind of work the second wave, but made sure that both funding is available where it's required, as well as our bandwidth is available where it's required.
Thanks, Gayatri. And I think we'll come back to your point around, what it meant for existing NGOs who weren't doing relief work and who had to both survive through difficult times, but also maybe pivot, right, to serve the needs of their community. So we'll come back to that later. But both of you all spoke about, how everyone stepped up, right? Like different parts of the value chain, different constituents, like stepped up and said, okay, what is needed? And I think you as funders listen to what was needed, right? It wasn't like y'all had the solution, but y'all said, okay, y'all tell us what's happening on the ground and how we can help, right? Ved, you've worked, it's this putting together a coalition of like 7 and 60 and then now 80 organizations isn't an easy thing to do, right? I mean, it probably took a crisis for this to happen. So one, there is the collaboration that, NGOs came from across and did, but there's also, like both Gayatri mentioned and you mentioned in your earlier presentation, there's a lot of civic action, right? There are citizens, everyday members of the community who stepped up. So, I mean, other than the fact that it was a crisis, are there other factors that you think drove this coming together, this kind of everyday engagement, volunteering, attention from media? I mean, do you have a sense? Could you speak a bit to that?
Yeah, there were many factors that coalesced to make it happen on the ground. See, fortunately now in hindsight, we know that there was no significant COVID in the villages last time. Second, though, it is many people in the NGOs have also died. It was much more difficult this time, and this time we were seeing 5 to 10 deaths per village. This time is most terrible. But the last time, one of the key factors, you can call them volunteers, basically whom we call CRPs in the NRLM language, this community resource persons are my women power. They are in the villages. So if we brag that there were 10,000 villages we had presence, in each one of them there was a woman leader. She was the what we call a soldier on the battlefront. They were the ones who were giving time. I'll give you an instance of that. When you provide aid, suppose you say food, Gayatri talked about, both of you, then who will reach the food, right? And PDS had not started to work. It worked later. But and in that you have to say, okay, there will be maramari in the village. You start going with langar, over all sorts. So if NGO started to do the selection, then they will be beaten black and blue. So it was the women in the SHGs who did the selection of the what we can call in BRAC language, the ultra poor, the people who are ultra vulnerable. So they played many roles in that sense, reaching the ration, and Anganwadi was not working. So they actually identified pregnant and lactating mothers and the babies and the children to whom this was critical. So one thing going for us, in a way, the wind in favor of the bowler, if you go to do it a cricket analogy, was the women on the ground, and this was the result of 30 years of work of the grassroots organizations. They pre-existed. In fact, many cases, the SHG federations had lakhs of rupees. They used that money to give out loans, and that has not come back. Now it's a challenge to refill that. So one major thing was that. Second, I must say, administration, the district administration, the government was very respectful and supportive of the NGOs' work, because when lockdown was announced, government machinery had announced the intent, but they had not reached. So they are the two major factors, I would say, and the donors. So collective, and why the collective is important, because each one of the donors have their pre-existing grantees, they've done due diligence. But here was a demand in every nook and corner from Punjab to the northeast. So they trusted Vedarya, Naren, Nath, and Apurva. They go, the money will reach, ration will reach. So Azim Premji Foundation, Omidyar, Gates Foundation, and not to forget Argyam and the Ford Foundation. And I don't want to mention money, but this is very, very important for us to reach lakhs and lakhs of poor people. These are the three factors that supported us in the and media. Of course, I would not talk about data. Gayatri's talked about it, but I think media, Hindustan Times also published our article which talked about how many people went without food and how many people ran out of cash. And we put out some demand कि नरेगा को ठीक ठाक करो, etc. So there are many factors, and I would say PMO also received our recommendations, and they wanted to know what is happening on the ground. So many factors. We are very lucky to get that kind of support. Thank you.
Thanks, Ved. It's interesting you mentioned government donors as well as civil society, right? I mean, in a session that's being run by Rohini Nilekani Philanthropies, because she's always talking about Samaj, Sarkar and Bazaar, and I think you brought out that thing really well. Gayatri, both the Gayatris, and I think this is something Ved mentioned. There are organizations who've been doing other work, right? You all have funded them across the spectrum, right? Whether it's education, whether it's gender, whether it's climate change, agriculture. And Gayatri, Lobo, you mentioned some of this, right? They still had to do what they had to do, but they also had to move to welfare mode, right? I mean, their communities are saying, we need relief, we need food, we need rations. So how did you all manage that, right? Because as donors, there's that dilemma you have. How do we continue to be supportive of existing organizations while also serving, what are communities in need? Can each of you all speak a bit to just manage doing that balancing act?
Sure. Should I go first?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So we did two things, Vanita. When we realized that a lot of funding is going to get redirected to COVID, and rightly so, right? That was the need of the hour, or to relief funds across states or central government. We said, who's going to suffer are the NGOs who still have very important work to do, right? You're working in gender, you still have to do that. You work on education, even if schools are closed, you still feel a responsibility towards teachers or schools or students. So two things we did. One is we immediately let all our NGOs know that your funding is not going to stop, right? We will continue to fund you. We will not hold you to the same expectations because we know there's a lockdown, right? There's only that much you can do. But at the end of the day, we know you have to pay salaries, so that funding won't stop. The second thing we did is we kind of did an exercise with them, and we said, we need each of you to call every funder you have and understand what your cash flow is. Don't assume you're getting funding because we can see funds being redirected. So it was not an easy thing for them to do because nobody wants bad news, but they spoke to every funder and then came back to us saying, okay, we look like we're going to be short by so much. So then we gave them emergency funding to cover that amount. The second thing we did was we knew that people are going to lose jobs during the pandemic. So we worked with ILSS and created a program where people who've lost their jobs we would fund them to do like an internship along with getting training by ILSS on fundraising, because we felt that the sector really lacks good fundraising people. So let's use this as an opportunity to bring in more fundraisers into the sector. So we said we'll pay you a stipend, I think for some 40,000 a month, which is, probably not what they were getting earlier, but decent enough to bide through COVID, and got them hopefully an additional skill through the program. So these two things we said were different from COVID relief, but necessary because of the just the need of the hour at that time.
Thank you, Gayatri. Diveja?
Sure. I think for us it was similar to Gayatri's experience. We very early on, beginning of March, again we knew we shut down our offices much earlier, much before the official lockdowns and so on happened in Maharashtra and then in the rest of India. So we knew that this was going to hit and it was going to be big. So that was literally at the fag end of the financial year. So we did reach out to all of our partners and ask them to utilize whatever funds they had very flexibly from their programs in order to make sure that their teams and the communities they were working with had enough sort of protection and support through COVID. So whether it was to, buy sanitizers, masks, educate about COVID, buy food, food kits and so on. So we built in that flexibility at the end of the 1920 financial year for these partners who are existing partners. I think safe to say for us, I mean, we kept with all our commitments, right? We didn't, all of our COVID response funds is over and above what we had planned. Now, because, I mean, in a way, the timing was good because it was the beginning of the financial year. So we were planning out our budgets. So we were able to, take into account the fact that despite us wanting to continue with our programs, it was physically impossible, right, to do a lot of these programs. So those went on pause, though the organization still received the funds that we were planning to give them in any case. Difficult situation to start any new programs in, because you can't do a needs assessment, you can't do a baseline. So that took a little bit of a hit, but we had no commitments there. And then we had a very large over and above CSR commitment to COVID response, which was really helpful, because that meant we could continue with our programs and we didn't have to redirect anything. We wrote to all of our partners when the pandemic hit, and sort of gave them that reassurance that even if programs scale down, we're still here. Our health programs we ran a very large prevention of vector-borne disease program in partnership with both the national government and 3 state governments. So those continued because it was malaria season at the time. So, and it was interesting because we were able to, we work with ashas and with health departments. So we were able to also include COVID messaging as well as support for ashas on COVID, which they didn't otherwise have. I think, key for us was also sort of building this relationship of trust and honesty with our partners, and explaining to them where we were struggling with what decisions we need to make with regards to our funds, and hear from them as well where they were struggling with getting more funds. For us, it was very, very clear that, I mean, from our own experience, not everybody is cut out to do relief work. Not everybody knows how, right? We didn't know how to do it. So, we try to build connections between our partners. If one partner was working in a community that needed a particular kind of support and was not able to provide that, could we either share best practices from one partner or connect them, and the other partner could do that work? Those are the kinds of collaborations we tried to build as well. And I think, most importantly, I think for us, one of the most important things we could do for our partners is to see them as part of our value chain, just as our vendors, suppliers, clients, customers are. So, we opened out during the first wave. We opened out our HR teams had developed an L&D platform, because people had time to take courses. We opened that out to all of our partners so that they could use it. We asked everybody to ensure that they had COVID insurance baked into their grants that they were getting for their teams. And for the second sort of wave, where we did two things, we supported we had a huge mental health program for our employees. We opened that out for our partner organizations as well, totally anonymous and completely free, for staff to be able to benefit from that mental health support. And we included as many as we could in our vaccination drives as well. So that's how we sort of worked through it.
Thanks, Gayatri. Ved, I mean, they've spoken from like a funder point of view, right? But I mean, you having this coalition, and can you speak a bit about from the non-profits point of view? I know your coalition is very wide, in terms of size, philosophy, regions, but while both Godrej as well as AT Chandra didn't pull out funding, we know a lot of non-profits did have to face the issue about not having enough funding. Even if they did, that funding was for programs that they were running, probably on education, probably on climate change, and now they needed to kind of serve their communities. What were non-profits going through? As in, like, how did they kind of manage through this crisis, especially ones who are not doing work around livelihoods and welfare work?
Well, most of my experience is still going to come from livelihoods. And I want to start by commenting the Gayatris, and then the Gayatris of this world were very kind. I'm basically saying that our funding agencies were very sensitive to what was happening on the ground. I'll give you one instance, that whether it is to do with the Axis Bank Foundation or Azim Premji Foundation, they said you can use the money that is allocated for travel for something else because there is no travel possible. So I'm just giving you an instance of how kind were they and sensitive to what was happening. What we found still was that the money has reduced this time. We have raised three times the amount of money. Say last year we raised 1 million, this time we raised $3 million. But it is the people like Pradhan and AKRSP may not feel the pinch as much as the small organizations. So we are having to run to new donors like Crypto Relief, and they've come to our rescue, certainly. But I think the money is not available for livelihoods. The money is available to run a vaccination campaign, or money is available to say oxygen, this whatever you call it, fixation with equipment. Or we are all engineers. I know at heart, or whatever it is, we want hardware. But what about soft skills development that will create jobs, etc.? So the one problem we will face going forward, not only small organizations will shut shop, and they are already shutting shop because of FCRA, subgranting problem, as well as people's attention being on the hardware. So going forward, I just want to share one lesson that how do you build capacities of the communities? We have learned, and I shared, can we focus on the local organizations that are federations or FPOs? Now, increasingly, we also have to focus on panchayats, which are local self governing institutions. And there is so much money everywhere. 30,000 crores is waiting under the 15th Finance Commission. That is one. In terms of, I'm no one to preach, I'm just sharing what is coming out. Secondly, can we build capacity of the NGOs? There is with local compliance pressure is huge from FCRA to MCA and so on. So can we have capacity building program uh, for the NGOs? Leadership development, because people are not sure how to cope with this crisis in going forward. And third, how to raise funds. So Gayatri, from EAT, if you can actually extend with the ILSS program or whatever, how to raise funds for their program. Can we run training programs for them? And this is something we are beginning to do. And I must mention Gates Foundation is now very kind to rejig their relief grant to say that, okay, you can build capacity of the NGOs. So going forward, it is very important to have robust communities and robust civil society. Both of you have actually recognized, we all have recognized, and I want to quote the Honorable Prime Minister, local should be vocal. And so I think local is most important. Even in terms of markets, people are saying, we are rather than go to distant markets, let's go to district markets, and so on. So I think that is the lesson we are learning. So can we do something about it is the question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ved. And I think all of y'all, I mean, touched really well on institutionally what each one of y'all are doing and what like the sector is doing, right, as like various constituents. But if I can end, I mean, we want to keep a little bit of questions because we've got questions from the audience. There is that each one of y'all touched upon how like the boundaries blurred, right? There was a lot of civic engagement, whether it was in the form of employees, whether it was in the form of volunteers, whether it was in the form of, both urban and rural India, everyone, stepping up. How do we maintain this momentum, right? Because things are never going to go back to business as usual, right? Some things have fundamentally changed, in our country, in our sector. I mean, can you like have one suggestion on how do we kind of keep citizenship, engaged, ordinary citizens to be part of this and invested in making sure that things improve for communities across the country. Gayatri, Gayatri Devecha, maybe. Yeah. So just one thing, right? Well, how do we keep
Wow.
them going? Sorry.
It's really the $1 million question, right?
And y'all have seen some of this happen, right? As in like in the work.
Yeah.
So maybe like something
Yeah.
we can,
We've seen huge amounts. I mean, all of our employees that go, no volunteering activity has ever had as much success as people calling our team up and saying, how do we help? Do we cook food and distribute it around our houses? People who are employed at our factories actually distributing those food kits themselves. I'll never forget this one example of a construction site at Godrej Properties, when in the middle of this lockdown with broken supply chains, I'm not sure how, but one of our team members was able to procure a sewing machine because the women living on that site knew how to use the sewing machine, and they said, give us something to do, we can make masks. And so I don't know how this individual found a sewing machine, but he did. And they used cloth that they had to make these masks, and the teams there helped them sell it around the site. So it was really quite something to see how we keep it up. I think really, I think one is just listening to what is it that people are passionate about. But, I'd really like to answer this question from the perspective of a corporate citizen. Right. I think for us as a business, what has become clear is that our role in social performance and in social impact, it goes way beyond CSR, right? We have many ecosystems that we interact with just through business as usual. And what does it mean for us to be a responsible company as far as everybody who's connected to these ecosystems is concerned, whether they're people who work in logistics and move our goods, whether they are contract casual workers? Is our role merely doing CSR and looking at the needs of communities? Shouldn't we be doing more? Can we be more of a catalyst? And so for us, I think what is keeping the momentum going is that thinking. And we've embarked upon this journey of really trying to understand what do we what do we mean by this? What are the various aspects of, I wouldn't say human rights, but human rights and also human well-being that companies are responsible for? And how do we play a catalytic role as a diversified conglomerate in that? So that's my rather long answer.
No, I think this whole thing you're bringing about as a corporate citizen, right? What can people do? I think it's like a great point. Gayatri?
Sure. So since Gayatri talked about corporate citizens, maybe I can talk about just everyday citizens, right? I think one thing that will really help, and I don't know what the answer, how we do it, but think simple, transparent communication, right? If I know that my volunteering time or money can result in X, I'm more compelled to do that or give that time or money. But if it's going into a vacuum that I feel like I've done something, but I really don't know, there's nothing to bring me back there again. It'll be a one-time thing. So when people across the world started contributing to oxygen concentrators, they in their heads they could see it saving a life. But or even just cash, right, for food for people to get fed during the pandemic. But if I say you need to contribute 100 rupees every month to climate change, it's hugely important, but I'm not seeing as a citizen of what that is. But I think there are ways to simplify that message and make it transparent so I can see that link. And I think that's something maybe communication experts, media need to Smanita, you need to wrap our heads around and see what we can do.
I think that's a great point, right? Because again, during crisis, people step up. It's how do you maintain that momentum beyond crisis mode? And some of it is if they can see this, if they can put a face, a name. I mean, unfortunately, that's how it works. So it like behooves us to like find areas like things which are harder, more intangible, right? Rights-based stuff, climate change, all of that, which you can't put like a visible thing to kind of make that fundable in a sense.
Similar to what Ved said, right? Infrastructure we can see.
Correct.
Yes, I want to build a college and have my family's name on the plaque there.
Yeah.
But is that there's lots more that can be done with many more people who don't have the money to build a college building.
Yeah. And Ved, if we could have your one suggestion.
Yeah,
How to keep the momentum going.
Momentum is driven by both the Gayatris here. So I want to build on first Gayatri Divecha's point on citizenship. I want to build on the large number of volunteers that came, and all of them were below 30, not above 60 like me. So I have great faith. All the sensitivity is very much there in our Indian young people's hearts. So one thing I want to suggest is that we should continuously go to all the campuses, whether it's the IIT or whether it's Sydenham College or whatever college it is, when the child is only 16, 17, 18. That is a time we have to expose them to poverty, gender equality, climate crisis. Even if they go on to join Godrej tomorrow, they will be sensitive citizens and sensitive corporate citizens. So that is one thing we got to be doing. Buddha Fellowship, they may join, not join. I think some people are totally committed because they are from farmers background, whatever it is. They maybe 1% will join. That is entirely giving their life to bring about change and be like Korean. But of course, that is also a game changer. We need to go further. But even if we can do one exposure, immersion, or summer internship when they are young, they will, like Godrej's program, there is a ETA program of Hindustan Levers. If we can do something, and I am offering, we can work with you to design a program for even young corporate managers when you are doing the management training. So that is one. Second, I want to build on to the communication part where IDR is playing a huge role to bring out to life what is happening. Otherwise, out of sight, out of mind. So, if we can bring out the work being done by our SHG women, by local small NGOs in public, I think, and then build migrants into the program so that people they stay in the memory. But there is no difference now between urban and rural. So, communication, I think, is a very, very important role. Media is going to be, social media is very, very important to build on that. So I have no additional point to make. I think that these are the two Gayatris, and I am fond of Gayatri mantra. So I am going to say that we should build on that. Thank you.
But you did make an important point, Ved, about getting the young, right? You're giving them a taste of what this looks like in a sense, and the fact that you said even about communications, digital. I think we rely too much on traditional print media and mainstream media to kind of carry the messages, but the young, they're not reading newspapers, right? And they are on digital channels, so we as a sector do more around making some of these stories, more like personable, more like immediate, more like in like in their lives kind of thing. And I think there are lessons that we have from there. I think we now will go to audience questions. There's one question here for the panel, which says the pandemic has exposed the structural weakness of the sector. I mean, and I think all of us know this, right? Many NGOs had, smaller NGOs, even like larger ones, had limited reserves. When you funding comes to a stop, you have limited ability to work on the program. What can we learn? I mean, what needs to change? Uh, if this situation has to change, and maybe Gayatri Lobo, I can have you speak to it, just because you fund institutional capacity, and I know that you've come across, you encountered this with like NGOs, within and outside your portfolio.
So one of the things we've been doing for the last so many years is funding capacity building, as Manita mentioned, and leadership development programs. And this year, looking at the needs, we supported two new additional programs. One was through which CISIP has been conducting along with Harvard Business School on resilient RSN, or resilient strategies for nonprofits. Sorry, I'm terrible with acronyms. And the second one is with Atma, Britspan, and a bunch of others on the future of impact. So really thinking about what is it that nonprofits need in this time of crisis, and how do you come out of it still resilient. That's one thing. The other thing we realized through our work during the pandemic is that we, in some ways, not necessarily heard what the nonprofits are saying, which we learned to do perhaps better this time. So three gaps we found in our offering. One was programs that were not in English. So we've just launched a program which is being conducted in Hindi for second run leaders, because we need everyone to be able to step up to the plate when things get tough. And the other one we've realized, especially again during the pandemic, that we were not doing was focusing on mental health and well-being. So we had a program that our nonprofit leaders, and in fact we open it up to anyone who wants to be part of it, who can, and at every level, would require support in terms of just their mental well-being. This is a tough time for everyone. So we said let's try and get that off the ground. But yes, there are many more gaps in the plumbing that need to be fixed, and happy to hear more suggestions as well.
Yeah, and I know we've run out of time, but Ved, I just want to go back to you on this, right? Because you are seeing this with NGOs, right? How are they managing? I mean, when they run out of reserves, what can be done? Because it's not easy. I mean, nobody funds corpus, nobody funds, our laws don't allow for like reserves beyond a certain amount of time. what can NGOs do at their end? One is funders, like funding, unrestricted costs and core costs and stuff like that. But are there, I don't know, tricks of the trade that NGOs can do to kind of, keep cash flows?
So two things we can do, and and I wanted to answer other question, that is, their good program doesn't depend on the size. So I think coalitions provide basically common platform for cross learning. When I mentioned that every 2 weeks we are meeting, 5 NGOs present their program every time. So I'm learning, others are also learning. That means seamlessly some learning is sort of transferred to smaller organizations also. So can we promote, of course, can we promote effective cross-learning platforms? And if already collaborators are there, 60, 80 collaborators are there, and we have very, very active WhatsApp group and so on. So can that be seen as a strategy to build capacity, particularly of these small NGOs? And some 15 members who joined, they came and said, I said, what is your expectation? They said, we have come to learn from people like Pradhan. So I think that is one of the key things we can do. And second, that points to is that we don't have to hire people for cash, I mean, for paying them a consultancy fees. Larger organizations, you call it, or more well resource organizations, they have resource people. They know what to share. They know how to deal with health also. So Jan Swasth Sahayog last year actually trained almost for peanuts 25 of our organizations how to take care of COVID. So strategies means resources are already there. We can build their capacity and we can make use of the ILSS kind of a role people can play to how to raise their presentation. Communication means also how to present what they are doing well. Because I am been to some I can present it, talk the same language. But can Bridgespan come and teach a small organization in Hyderabad and Bundelkhand how to present the grassroots work that they are doing? So these are the small strategies that can help us to. But other thing we have to do about HR, something we have to do with the, I think people don't are not joining. I'm coming back to HR point. People are not joining NGOs. My son wants to join McKinsey or some other, it's as close as that, even though I took him on a Narega Yatra, but it's still. So I think that is a point we need to work something around. Young blood has to come to the sector.
I think children never want to do what their parents are doing so much, so that might not be.
Manita, I'll add one small thing is that you might not be not for profit might not be able to either afford a course or have the time take the time off to go for a course. Use your funders, leverage their organizations to get some of these inputs, and it also helps build that relationship of trust. Like I know my team would love to do this with all of the partners we work with. So
thank you.
We'll come to you.
Please do anytime.
Yeah, sorry, we've really run out of time, and I think I had so many questions myself, and I know that there were some in the audience, but I'd like to close this out. Thank you so much, Gayatri, and Ved. I think you all really spoke about a range of things from an institutional as well as individual, as well as giving us like recommendations on like how to kind of keep some of this momentum going. Thank you so much, and Yash, over to you.
Thank you so much, Maranitha. Thank you so much to all our speakers as well for such a vibrant and insightful discussion. And thanks for the audience for their questions. The next session we have lined up for you is Citizenship as a Service, which begins at 5 p.m. sharp. We'll have a group of entrepreneurs in the active citizenship space discussing the role of technology there. So stay tuned for that. And thank you everyone for joining. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Smarita, and thank you, Gayatri. Both. We will talk offline.